MMA, highlight of this UFC 281 in New York. Finally, AlexPereira inflicts a TKO on IsraelAdesanya. In the mythical Madison Square Garden in New York, UFC 281 was a real spectacle. Also, the main meeting was a real shock within the middleweight category. And, although he has already defended his title 5 times, IsraelAdesanya had a lot to prove against AlexPereira. It was necessary to forget the 2 past failures in kickboxing. Finally, no redemption for the Nigerian. Indeed, AlexPereira inflicts a TKO on IsraelAdesanya. Summary of the meeting. AlexPereira tries directly to impale the champion with a front kick. A lot of kicks sent on both sides. At the end of the round, Adesanya explodes on a combination of hooks and narrowly misses knocking out the very ailing challenger. The minute of rest did the Brazilian the greatest good. Moreover, he is the most convincing in the second round with a successful takedown at the very end. The pressure applied by Poatan on the champion is suffocating. In the third round, Izzy manages to take his opponent's back. The champion manages to do damage on the ground and maintains his opponent throughout the third round. Now both men enter the championship rounds. The Brazilian appears tired, he no longer applies constant pressure to the stylebender. Also, it is indeed Adesanya who sends better shots, especially jabs. Izzy injures his leg in the final round, as Pereira checks his kick. More fear than harm for the champion's leg. Finally, Pereira sends a rain of blows to the champion against the cage, ending the encounter. A new boss in the house. Back to the wall, AlexPereira knew he needed a finish to win the fight. Also, that flash in the fifth and final round came at just the right time. First career loss at middleweight for IsraelAdesanya. IsraelAdesanya vs. Josh Thompson live blog is here for UFC 281. In New York's Madison Square Garden on Saturday, AlexPereira will compete for the middleweight championship. In a kickboxing match for glory way back in 2016, Adesanya faced Pereira. The two fighters fought again at Glory of Heroes 7 a year after Adesanya lost a contentious decision to the Brazilian after a competitive 3 rounds. As Pereira put Adesanya to sleep in the third round of their fight, there was no controversy this time. The kickboxing portion of the last stylebender's career was thus cut short, and he turned exclusively to MMA. Adesanya is now getting his chance for vengeance 5 years later and in a different sport. When Pereira joined the UFC in 2021, the promotion did little to hide their intent to hasten the fight for the title with Adesanya. And indeed, it did take place. In order to earn a shot at the middleweight championship, Pereira defeated Sean Strickland in the first round before knocking out Andrea Michailidis in his professional debut, Bruno Silva in his sophomore year via unanimous decision, and Strickland in the third round against Pereira. And even though the distance traveled to get here has undoubtedly been less than most, Adesanya's opponent is unquestionably his most intriguing test in a while. It's UFC 281 time. A jam-packed card is on tap for the MMA Titans' return to Madison Square Garden in New York City. 2 title fights are the tense main event. When he welcomes an old rival, AlexPereira, into the fray, middleweight champion IsraelAdesanya will be looking to continue his remarkable run in the division. The Brazilian powerhouse has already taken advantage of this title opportunity in only his 6th MMA fight, and he has 2 kickboxing victories over Adesanya. The women's strawweight title, which will be up next, will be on the line as Carla Esparza attempts to defend the 115-pound belt against former champion Weili Zhang. Following her first title victory over Rose Namajunas in 2014, Esparza is currently enjoying her second reign. With a crushing knockout of Joanna Jedrzejczyk, Zhang recovered from losing her title to Namajunas. Get the most recent information on the world of combat sports from 2 of the best in the business if you can't get enough boxing and MMA. Below is a detailed preview of what to expect at UFC 281 this weekend. For the best analysis and in-depth coverage, subscribe to Morning Combat with Luke Thomas and Brian New York, the battle between Israel Adesanya and the United States has gained another chapter. After Saturday, AlexPereira experienced similar ups and downs. At 2:01 of round 5 of the main event of UFC 281, Pereira, 7-1 MMA, 4-0 UFC, rallied to defeat Adesanya, 23-2 MMA, 12-2 UFC. Madison Square Garden hosted the fight. Pereira had 2 kickboxing victories over Adesanya, one of which was a contentious knockout. He added an MMA victory to their head-to-head matchup at UFC 281 with a standing, come-from-behind TKO. Highlights of previous fights ended with 2 distinctive and memorable walkouts, further elevating the big fight's sense of natural rivalry. The first person to reach the cage was Pereira, who did so to the sound of an indigenous song. Brazilian green light radiated from Madison Square Garden. The next to go was Adesanya. Although Jigsaw from the Saw films made an appearance on screen, there were no Undertaker or samurai outfits. Adesanya scored a pair of punches that left Pereira hurt on his feet in the final moments of a hard-fought round 1. Pereira recovered, though, and applied constant pressure to Adesanya throughout round 2. The crowd gasped in audible shock as Pereira defeated Adesanya with a late takedown. As the fight unexpectedly turned to a grappling match in round 3, the momentum swung back in favor of Adesanya. He carried the advantage into round 4 and dismantled the approaching Pereira. But in round 5, things began to change as Pereira entered the ring with a genuine sense of urgency. Pereira increased the stakes after it became apparent he was probably losing 3 rounds to 1. Adesanya was knocked off balance by a checked leg kick. Adesanya got back up and regained himself. The barrage resumed a short while later. Adesanya was hit repeatedly by powerful punches from Pereira. Adesanya attempted to bob and weave his way out of danger while leaning up against the cage, but referee Mark Goddard had enough. Adesanya was dodging and ducking as he waved the fight off. Adesanya initially refrained from complaining further either during or after the official decision. In just his 8th MMA match of a professional career, Pereira triumphs and takes home the title. Pereira has been associated with Adesanya for those prior victories ever since entering MMA. Pereira has passed every test put in front of him since 2015, despite some critics noting his brief run to the UFC Championship and in MMA in general. Pereira won over Sean Strickland, Bruno Silva, and Andreas Michailidis prior to UFC 281. A winning streak of 6 fights is ended by the defeat.